When you think of a menacing beast, what do you think of? Baby-eating snakes? Violent mauling lions? How about vicious sharp-toothed sharks? While all these creatures are quite intimidating, there is one who is still lurking in the shadows of your local pond. It's geese. And while you may not think they're a threat, just listen to this. In peaceful Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, an 87-year-old lady was attacked in cold blood by none other than a goose. The fiend knocked the grandma down off her knocker and violently pecked her with his steely beak. This unwarranted assault left the poor lady with a broken elbow and pelvis. And the geese reign of terror is still not over. In Alaska, a man was out feeding his chickens when a perturbed goose decided to attack. To escape the goose, the man hopped on an ATV, and he crashed the ATV into a tree when the goose tried to nosedive him. This poor man was left with a broken leg. Overall, the citizens of America lack a certain respect and fear of geese. This makes them much more likely to become victims of these attacks. I once was as naive as you, and unfortunately, I learned my lesson the hard way. I was walking around my neighborhood pond with my dog, out for a stroll, like we usually are, and like usual, there was just geese everywhere, doing their own thing. And unfortunately, one of the geese out there didn't like that I had my dog with me and didn't like me. And so without warning, the goose charged at me, with his head pointing directly at me, his wings open, and he was hissing. I thought my dog would be intimidating enough to scare him away, but I was wrong. I started to run, and the goose flew at me, honking. I ducked my head just in time to avoid the collision, and the goose then returned to his pond and just stared bullets at me. My dog was no help. Unless people want a fortune that ended up like mine, the only way to protect people from these mongrels is to eliminate them from our resident areas. Unfortunately, this is hard because of the strict regulations that our government has enforced. Geese can only be hunted in the wild for a certain few months of the years. And as you will see later, this is actually a problem. But for now, I just want to persuade you that geese should be less protected in North Carolina. As we already know, geese are aggressive to humans, but what I bet you didn't know is that geese also contribute to spreading diseases and overtaking resident communities. The Center for Disease and Control found that Canada geese can carry antibiotic-resistant superbugs and may be spreading bacteria such as E. coli, salmonella, and others wherever they migrate. While this might not sound like a big deal, you should know that these diseases from geese mostly spread through their droppings. This is especially dangerous if you consider the amount of goose poop that are left in resident areas, especially in places where the resident geese overpopulate, such as hanging out in your neighborhood pool, grazing in your lawn, or crapping in your driveway. While many don't plan on touching fecal matter anytime soon, if you have a sibling, a small child, or maybe a dog, you could be likely to getting these diseases whether you want it or not. If we are to ever overcome the tyrannical geese, regulations have to be decreased. By allowing more hunting, the geese will eventually be forced to leave the resident areas, which is vital if we're going to fix anything without causing geese to go extinct. I'm not one that's usually for violence, but sometimes it's the best option. These geese are not naturally fearful of, anything. Bad smells, ferocious dogs, cars, they're not a strong enough deterrent to scare geese away. These geese have just become too comfortable living in resident areas like lakes and golf courses and driveways. AllAboutBirds.org says that most biologists believe that there are far too many resident geese, more than can be sustained in urban suburban areas. Lucky for us, there is plenty of room for them in the wild. Ducks Unlimited reports that geese learn to avoid areas where hunters are likely to be present, so if we were allowed to hunt them in residential areas, these geese would eventually return to the wild. For those who are opposed to violence, there's always other ways to, deter geese, but they'll probably come back. In the end, our goal is to get the geese to return to their natural habitat, and unfortunately, they are too stubborn to learn the easy way, so violence might be your best option. Now imagine a world where you don't have to wait 10 minutes to get to work just because there's a ton of geese in the road, or a world where you could freely walk your dog without worry of an attack from a vicious goose. Now, you might not be able to convince the governor of North Carolina to change his mind on loosening up regulations, but what you can do is you can stop making it easy for geese to stay in your neighborhood. Stop feeding them at the pond, call the animal control if they're getting out of hand, and do yourself a service by staying out of their way, especially if they have goslings. Geese have to go. Their aggression is getting out of hand, they're spreading too much disease, and their overpopulation is really taking a toll on resident communities. If you want to fix these things, geese must be less protected in North Carolina. If you want peace, get rid of the geese.